So the few of you that were here so far, okay, can you kind of tell me the two kind of topics that we talked about so far, to kind of get into what we're going to do today? Remember any of it? Oh, come on, Grace, you usually have a great memory. Not sure right now? The first one, remember, it had to do with, yeah, compared to, okay. And what conclusion did we try to come up with in that lesson?
That if we know that in order for a camera to come about, somebody would have made it.
There was a
make
design
the conclusion.
and a builder. Yep. But what the evolutionist is trying to tell, now when I say evolutionist, I don't always say this because it seems redundant. I'm talking about an atheistic evolutionist, all right? A person that does not believe that there was a mind in the beginning. There was not a God, there was not any kind of intelligence. A person that believes that will tell you that the I, which is highly, highly more complex than my shoebox camera or even my digital camera, will tell you that this was designed by accident, by something mindless. Now, you weren't here last week, but you guys was. The two of you, the three of you actually. So I went the next week into what their argument would be as to why an eye could evolve, but a camera could not. In other words, a modern camera couldn't have evolved, but they say that an eye could. You remember what the reason was? They would say that an eye could evolve. Has to do with ultimately where the eye came from. What comes before man in evolutionary chain? Oh, come on. Everybody should know
There's
that.
some sort of animal.
Yeah, the monkey.
Yeah.
We talked about that. All right. And before that, there was something else before that. So they go all the way back to amoeba. What does the amoeba and the monkey and everything in between have in common?
Living cells.
Their life. So what their argument is that a camera is inert matter, but at the same time, that's not what what an eye is. It's living matter, and living matter can evolve. What was our argument against that? This is key. This is the thing that took me most of my life to really realize, and most people still don't.
Wouldn't, before the amoeba, the first living thing, wouldn't it have to be non-living? Wouldn't it have to come from a non-living thing?
And the answer to that is yes. So this right here is where they want us to look for a beginning, right? They want us to look to the monkey because we know some people that are kind of like monkeys. Everybody does. You don't have to admit it, but I know everybody's got somebody that they wonder where they came from. And that's almost believable. I don't, but there is. But what they need to be showing you is this chart because it takes you back to the single cell organism. All right? And that's hardly ever shown. But like you just said, there had to be something that came before that single cell organism. Matter. The actual start had to come from something like a gaseous substance, a rock, something inert, something that has no mind, no brains, no intelligence whatsoever. That's the key to understanding their argument and to defeating it. Because they have to make the jump, and we're going to have a quote or two coming up in a week or so. They have to make the jump from lifeless, meaningless, thoughtless, non-intelligent, zero capabilities of doing anything but sitting there into the single cell life. And that is where the life, they say, can take us into take us into the more complex things like the eye. But if you go back enough time, the eye actually had to come from a rock because that's where everything come from. Do you see how their argument can't hold water when looked at right from the beginning? It's like a shell game. They're not showing you that part. And that's important. So the start was actually some kind of inert matter. And they can't even tell you where that matter came from. I mentioned last week, there was a kid when I was in high school, friends of my brother. And he would go around, this was in the late 1960s, when evolution was just starting to really creep into the schools a lot. Okay? And he went around saying he didn't want to believe in God. Ether always was. That was the statement. He would say it every day. Ether always was. What did that mean? That meant that he didn't believe that a God always was, but he knew that something always had to exist. He chose ether, a gaseous substance. Because, like we said last week, and this is from I forget the guy's name right now. I'll find it here in a minute. Some people think that God created the universe. Others think that nothing created the universe. Think about what that means. Which one of these do you think is the funniest? The nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God does not exist. Well, maybe. But do you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That is the definition of nothing. It doesn't exist. So either you have to think that it is God, something you cannot see, touch, taste, and science cannot prove, or you have to think that it is nothing, something you cannot see, taste, touch, and science cannot prove. I hope we can all argue or agree that if your nothing spontaneously erupts into everything, then that is more magical and illogical than if intelligence designed it. Most people don't want to stretch their brains back far enough to see that. Okay? Important stuff. This is a bishop, probably in the Catholic Church, but by his garb he could end up being Eastern Orthodox. I'm not sure, it doesn't say. But this is what he said.
So you're telling me the Oxford Dictionary cannot exist without a brain, but the universe existed without a creator? And is it possible? Logically speaking, it is absolutely illogical. Doesn't make any sense. But let me say one thing about the human DNA. Just one.
That's all I really wanted you to hear. He said that people say that the Oxford Dictionary has to have a beginning and has to have people that wrote it, but that the universe doesn't. Same argument, all right? What was it in the very first lesson that we start with? We didn't start with talking about the camera. We talked about the guy that said that if there's a watch, there has to be a watchmaker. And that's the old watchmaker argument. That came from a guy in the 1800s that originally said that. Maybe it was the 1700s. Very famous argument. All right. So we did not actually come from our beginning from monkeys like we just said. We had to have come from lesser organisms than that. And eventually, if we go back far enough, we have to go to matter. So how did we say that this was the epiphany for me, and this was probably about 25 years ago. If I was to give them the fact, just hand them the fact that life could evolve, I think that's true, and I definitely know that's not true now. But if we went back to the point where we said, yeah, we could come from a monkey, and then we could come from some other kind of mammal and down to fish and the animals, et cetera, and go all the way back to a single cell, and maybe even that rock somehow or another came to life and could move around, etc. Where was my line in the sand, so to speak, where I could not go past this one point? And that is making the jump from zero intelligence to us, thinking, feeling, logic, that sort of thing. Now, we mentioned the last couple of weeks, a couple of times, an atheistic evolutionist has to account for that. Because otherwise they're believing in something that's stupider than what they think God people are thinking that they're thinking stupid about them. Where along the line did our thought, if we start with a rock, where does our intellect come from? When there's, I don't know if you can imagine, zero intellect at all. No intelligence. Where do they say that come from? Because they have to account for it. Do you remember? Do you remember? I will show you. Chemistry and electricity. Over time, chemistry and electricity kind of came together in certain things as the brain started to evolve, and eventually the chemistry and electricity did what? Started thinking. Now, there was a rock originally, but now all of a sudden chemistry and electricity is taking what that rock started as and giving it thought. Has any of you guys ever taken psychology in college or high school? Huh? You have. And what we talked about is the fact that, and now don't get me wrong, I'm not against everything in psychology. But if you look, what they're going to tell you and what they're going to emphasize is the electricity and chemistry that goes on in your body as what makes you think and do the things that you do. There's a reason why that class does that. It has to. There's not another explanation that they give, because then they would have to believe in something besides chemistry and electricity caused the rock to be able to think. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yes? Everybody? Yes? I think it's a key point. I want to make sure that everybody has it before we move on. So, here's what we're going to talk about now. And we're only going to get through symbiotic relationships today. We're not going to get to intelligence. Right? That's going to be a class next week. Symbiotic relationship. And anybody in here have any idea what that means? A symbiotic relationship is a long-term interaction between two or more different species that benefits at least one of the organisms involved. Now, we're going to talk about specifically mutualism as it has to do with these kinds of relationships, is when both organisms benefit from the relationship. Here's a simple example. We're going to get into way different ones here in a second, but just so that the point is clear. There is a symbiotic relationship between two people that are studying together for a test. Hopefully, each one of them brings a set of knowledge that helps the other pass the test. Now, unfortunately, in school, that's not always the case. There's usually one person that's really brainy, trying to help the dumb one, okay? And you can guess which one I was. But that's not what's supposed to happen, all right? It's supposed to be mutual. So that one and another, they may not know exactly the same things, but they can coach each other enough to get to the point where they can both do well in filling each other's knowledge gaps. But are there examples of mutual symbiotic relationships in nature? And that's we're going to look at several of those today, and then come to a conclusion. Can anybody think of any? Come on, you guys had to take science in high school.
Well, sharks is a little fish. I don't know what fish. I have a fish.
We're gonna mention that.
No, okay.
All right, that's good. No, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of something simpler to start with. Okay.
No.
Now think about this. A bee collects nectar from flowers to make honey and to feed other bees. During the process, flowers get pollinated because the bees carry the pollen to another plant. When the flower gets pollinated, then it can produce more nectar, and when the flower produces more nectar, then the bees get more honey. You can't kind of see how this is a cycle going around and around and around and around. So here's a question. If the bee did not exist, could the flower exist? Not under our current system. If a flower didn't exist, could the bee exist? They got nothing to eat. I want you to think about this. So it seems like they need each other pretty badly. Otherwise, neither one would end up existing. And this is a real good example of mutual symbiotic relationships. What's the problem for an evolutionist here? And they do try to explain this away. Okay.
Which one came first? If they can't exist without each other.
Yeah, but even if one came first, the other one, I mean, I remember thinking when they were talking about this in some class years and years and years and years ago when I was a much younger person. How long did that particular thing have to hang on, hold its breath, so to speak, and hope that this other thing that was necessary for its life, was it another day? Well, evolutionist says that it probably have to be a lot longer than that. So how did they survive in between, right? We can go even further and go, this is a problem because of Darwin's own tree of life. So if you look at this green line on the right, this is the line that shows the progression of plants. And then if you look at which one is it? Which one's the butterfly at the top? If you look at that blue one going this direction, okay, that's the progression of insects. So the problem becomes the green line is one, the blue line is another. The implication is that flowers evolved before and separate from insects. If bees and flowers evolved at different times, how did either survive long enough to become symbiotic? But if that was the only example that they had, I would say, well, maybe that was a fluke and it could happen somewhere. But there is an innumerable number of these in the universe. Science don't even know what they all are. And they're discovering new ones every day. There are, I would hate to even try to put a number on them. Are there other examples of mutual symbiotic relationships in nature? And the answer is, why, sure there is. So, first one we're going to look at real quick here is fungus, and algae. The fungus provides structure and protects the algae from drying out while the algae produces nutrients through photosynthesis. These kinds of things, they're called lichens, that's the collective name, can grow in unbelievable number of places. They can grow in bare rocks, they can grow in trees, fences, and they can even survive in Antarctica. But they can't survive without each other. They can't. But they're trying to tell us that these could have evolved separately. Now we'll come to the one that you remember. The barracuda and the dentist fish. If you're not familiar with this one, a barracuda eats almost anything in the sea, any kind of fish, except one. There's only one thing that a barracuda in the water doesn't eat. Guess what that is? It's this little teeny fish right down there by its jaw. The name of it is a dentist fish. There's probably another formal name, but that's what it's basically called, is a dentist fish. Guess what the dentist fish does for the barracuda?
To eat meat from the teeth?
Cleans its teeth. All right? Guess what the dentist fish exclusively eats? The crud from a barracuda's tooth. I know, nasty, but says it's good. If a barracuda's teeth are not kept clean, then they experience difficulty hunting and eating prey due to dull and broken teeth, potentially impacting their ability to catch food. This can lead, of course, to malnutrition and potentially even increased vulnerability with other predators that come along. In extreme cases, there's severe tooth decay and eventually infection and death. So, if that's true, and they know this is true, so I'm not just saying maybe, I'm saying they know it. So if this is true, how did they evolve separately? Because I don't think that shark could last very long, maybe a year, maybe 6 months, I don't know. I mean, I get my teeth cleaned about every 6 months, so maybe it's longer than that. But they couldn't survive for 100,000 years or more. They couldn't. So they had to be there semi-simultaneously, or this process wouldn't work. So guess what? The only thing that a dentist fish can eat is the stuff that's off a barracuda teeth. Neither can survive without the other. How could they survive independently? The exact same thing is true of the shark and the remora fish. Okay, different fish, but the shark, exactly the same thing. The shark must have the teeth cleaned for the same reasons as the barracuda, and the remora fish is the only one that can clean the shark's teeth and the only one that a shark will not eat. It gets even better. Here we have a crocodile and the Egyptian plover. Now, have you ever seen the shark when it sees something that it wants to eat, or not the shark, the crocodile when it wants to eat something like you or fish or a deer? It waits and waits and waits, and when it gets it in its mouth, what it does is it chomps down on it, takes it down to the bottom, beats it on a rock for a while, turns it over and over and over again until it stops moving, then it shoves it underneath some kind of a limb or a place where it can stay until it's hungry. But that thing can stay in its mouth for a very long period of time and pick its teeth, and it doesn't close its mouth. And it's the only thing that does that. How did this is a bird, this is a reptile. There's no way in the evolutionary chain that we just looked at that they came about at the same time. They're a long ways away from each other in that chart, a long ways away. Let's go to something slightly different. There is a shrimp and Alphiad, I think, I don't know for sure, and the goby fish. The goby fish, if I remember, became famous in, what was that cartoon movie? Yeah, I think that's Nemo. I'm pretty sure. I think that's where that came from. All right, now, I could be wrong, but it seems like I read that. Those two have also got a symbiotic relationship. And this little short video, it's less than a minute, is going to show you what that relationship is.
The association that exists between burrowing shrimp and goby fish found on many tropical reefs is mutually beneficial. Shrimp of the genus Alpheus construct burrows for both themselves and the fish to reside. In return, the gobies provide protection and early warning signals against predators for the shrimp. The warning signal consists mostly of a rapid tail flick that is detected by the shrimp through its long antennae, which remains in constant contact with the goby. A study showed that the relationship is obligate for several shrimp-associated gobies, with goby mortality being higher when the gobies are excluded from the burrows. Without the protection of gobies, the shrimp do not emerge from the burrows and burrow less frequently, resulting in slower growth rates as digging activity for the benthic prey is reduced.
These are unlikely partners. All right? Why did that happen by accident? They depend on each other for protection and everything else, for a place to stay. All right? Let's go to another one. This is the red-billed oxpecker, is on his back. And he eats the ticks and the dead skin and the mucus of a rhino. It's the only thing that, it's not like a woodpecker, but it pecks the backs of oxes and stuff. You see another picture here in red. Something else that the same thing does. I think it's the same bird. Now, it looks to me like it would be a nuisance and you'd be trying to shake it off your back like a fly coming and landing on your cheek, but they don't do that. And I want you to notice ticks, dead skin, and mucus. Okay, if you don't have a strong stomach, don't watch the next slide. They pick their noses, keep them clean. All right? And they have to have that, or one of them doesn't have anything to eat, and the other one doesn't get its nose picked. All right? These are but, what we do, maybe a half dozen at the most from just general nature. There are more than thousands. There are probably more than millions. I don't know for sure, but there are oodles and oodles and oodles of these. All of them. One depends on the other. Now, there are other kind of symbiotic relationships where one depends on the other, but the other one doesn't. Okay? There are some different kinds, and they'll try to, sidestep you by talking. I'm talking about mutualistic ones. There are lots and lots and lots of just the mutualistic ones. The next one's a little bit gross, but I didn't use real photos. I used drawings, so it's not quite so bad. This is the human gut. Now, inside there, it contains around 100 trillion bacteria. That's in your colon, all through that gut area. 100 trillion. Somebody said that's more than the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And you have that many, you have that many, you have that many, you have that many. Okay? They're tiny. But they are important. Bacteria in your gut help break down certain complex carbohydrates and dietary fibers that can't break down on their own. They produce short-chain fatty acids, and which is an important nutrient, as byproducts. They also provide the enzymes necessary to synthesize certain vitamins, such as vitamin B, vitamin B9, vitamin B1, vitamin B12, vitamin K, and others. What happens to you if you don't have the right kind or enough gut bacteria? Do you know that wasn't even well known when I was a kid? And I'll tell you a true story, not because I want sympathy, because it's true. I was an Anthony kid. You ever know any of them guys that have, they grow up and they got skin explosions everywhere? So my mom and dad, my dad had good insurance. He sent me to a dermatologist. Do you realize that for 10 or 12 years of my life, between 3,500 and 4,000 days in a row, I took an antibiotic capsule? What did that do to my gut? It destroyed it. They didn't even know what was happening. Since then, they try not to do that. They don't give you antibiotics for only a few days at a time. Maybe 10, maybe only 5. I took almost 4,000 in a row. Okay? And that was back in the 1960s and early 1970s. Wasn't that long ago. This is the reason why. There's a symbiotic relationship between what the bacteria get out of it. They have a place to stay and something to eat and break down. And you get that because you get that stuff broke down so that your body can get the nutrients that it needs. Who invented that? Did those microbes? What did those microbes eat? If they were like these simpler cell organisms before there was a human to feast on. Seems kind of unlikely and impossible to me. All right, I got one more before we sum up. This one to me is really, really simple, but it's really, really important. Think about this. We exhale carbon dioxide. Plants take in carbon dioxide. Plants exhale oxygen, and we need oxygen to live. If there wasn't plants and humans at the same time, how did any of this come about? How did any of this come about? It would be impossible for the plants to evolve first and humans millions of years later, probably. I don't know exactly their time but time frame, but I know it's a long time afterwards. So there's this cycle going on that is important. It's symbiotic. It's mutual, and it is. Without it, there isn't life of either kind of species. In fact, what we're gonna do now is watch about a 2-minute video that sums up what we said before we get into what we said so far, before we get into this ending. It's going to mention some of the things we already talked about.
It appears that organisms do exist in isolation. Everywhere they're found, even in the most extreme environments, we don't find just one type of organism. We find interacting organisms. For example, on barren rocks are lichens made of fungi and algae. Fungi extract water from the air and keep the algae moist. And algae harness energy from the sun and feed fungi. In soil, fungi live in the roots of trees and absorb water from trees, while trees in turn provide food for the fungi. In the sea, corals get food from algae that live within them and use their waste products. A similar cooperation takes place in our bodies. Microorganisms help us to digest food, and they enjoy the meal with us. In fact, all plant-eating animals must have such organisms in order to digest plants. Around the world, plants produce oxygen that animals need. Animals release carbon dioxide that plants need. Plants make food and other carbon compounds from raw materials, and then, when they die, microorganisms break down these complex compounds to provide new raw materials for plants. Some bacteria are designed to pull nitrogen out of the air and make nitrates needed by all life. Other bacteria are designed to return the nitrogen into the atmosphere. Cooperative relationships, cycles of provision, communities of organisms, a complex interwoven web of life where every organism has a place in the functioning of a larger whole. The value of the individual and the necessity of community, these are beautiful manifestations of a triune creator God. 3 persons in one.
All right, kind of summed up a little bit what we just got done saying. So, from the very beginning, we've been emphasizing something very, very important. And you corrected yourself last week when you said something, you said, no, we can't. What is it that we cannot do with any of this information? We cannot prove anything. My point is that not only can we not prove anything, but science cannot either. This is a choice. All right? And I'm going to have, I think by next week, I'm going to have a quote by a scientist that shows that they know that's true. okay? A Nobel Prize winning scientist. We're going to quote, I think, next week. Well, what is it that we have that we're looking at? What is all this stuff? Whether it's the relationship between how a camera cannot evolve, but the eye they say can, but we don't think it can because it didn't come from just matter, it came from eventually from a rock, or any of these symbiotic relationships. What are these pieces of? Not proof, but what?
Evidence.
They're evidence. So what we're doing in this kind of class is we are only collecting evidence, looking at the evidence and trying to figure out, does the conclusion fall on this side, or does the conclusion for what's true fall on the other side? If we look at the evidence in one way, we might come up with the idea that evolutionary atheistic evolution is how we got here. But if we look at the evidence another way, we have strong evidence to show that I don't think so. So there has to be another alternative. That's how we're running this class. And eventually, I don't know if I'll win exactly, but pretty soon I'm going to actually put up a chart. Every week, we're going to take these things, we're going to add them up. This piece of evidence, this piece of evidence, this piece of evidence, this piece of evidence, and then have a column over here. Which way do we think that evidence pointed? If we get enough evidence that points in one direction, that probably has to be true. But we still haven't proved it. We just have a burden of evidence that has to be overcome. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So, which is more reasonable? Where does the evidence point? Accidental, these are the two possibilities. Accidental reactions to mindless matter, accomplished by zero intelligence that's supposed to be over gradual of a gradual evolutionary process, or directed and created by an intelligence. Both partners in a symbiotic mutual relationships, the other argument would say, must have been created or existed at the same time for the express purpose of that taking place. Those are the only two choices. You have to choose between one or the other. Like I said, I don't think this is the right one. This is what the evolutionary scientists would say happened, or people that believe in atheistic evolution would say happened. What is the alternative to this? Well, Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 23 says, God said, let the waters teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the vault of the sky. So God created every living, the great creatures of the sea and every living thing that was on the water, and he moved above it, about in it, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. The evening and morning was the fifth day. And if we move down to the next pair of verses, it says, let the land produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, the wild animals according to its kind, and it was so. And God made the wild animals according to their kind, the livestock according to its kind, etc., etc., etc. What is it that this explanation is allowing for? Symbiotic relationships, because they could probably survive for a day without each other. A couple of days, right? But not millions of years. The question is, which one seems more reasonable given that? That's what we're looking at. So, if you say that a God created everything from nothing, it is in a short period of time, it is often called a fairy tale. But if you conclude that everything came from nothing over billions of years, it's called science. We're hoping. I've been asked before, you don't believe in science? Yeah, I believe in science. This is not what's going on. Okay? This is a belief system, just like Christianity is a belief system. And once you go down a certain path, you have to find reasonable ways to keep on believing what it is you believe. That's what the other side, that's what the evolutionist says about us. That is what I'm saying about them. And I have some of them on good quotes and stuff that admit it. All right? Any questions? That's all I got for today. Yeah.
So I know human links are probably just mixed this, but how do you kind of say mutualistic relationships come about?
I've read it. I tried to read some quotes on that. They fluff over it.
Okay, so they just have no answer.
I've not found one yet. That's a good question, and I'm gonna keep looking, but I haven't found what I would think would be an answer that actually explains that particular detail. Well, they go in and say that these things had to have evolved to finally match each other. Well, to me, that's not an answer. Okay, but if they came up with a really good answer that I couldn't disagree with, then I might have to reconsider the evidence. But as of now, I've not seen good answer.
I
You'd
think
be surprised. Don't forget your question. I have seen two different people have a deep discussion with Richard Dawkins. You know who Richard Dawkins is?
no.
He is been in the last 15, 20 years, the face and mouthpiece of evolution. Okay, very, very famous guy. Educated in Oxford, evolutionist, atheist, down to his toenails. And he's been asked some very pointed questions before, like, okay, what happened before the Big Bang? Not only can't he give an answer, he refuses to even discuss it. To the point he gets angry. Okay?
Which is a clear sign that somebody is correct about something.
Yeah. Just recently, Richard Dawkins, and I've seen some of his rallies where he ridicules Christianity to other atheists. So, I mean, ridicules them big time. And I saw a recent interview with him where he says he's actually talking about himself. A cultural Christian.
I was just thinking about that.
You hear that before? By cultural Christian, what he means is, I was raised around church people and stuff, and I really like Christmas carols, and I think the church goals are really cool. And he will even go so far as to say that the system that we live under, that's Christian based, is probably better than the alternative. Yeah, he's just recently come out and started saying in his old age.
That's pretty cool, actually.
It is. Yeah, what was your other question?
It's not much of a question, but I just think it's interesting that how they say every system of value order of which it evolved kind of just lines up with how God created everything.
How did Moses know that?
Mm-hmm.
We may talk later on. See, this class is going to have two parts. We're going to talk about what I call external. That's what we're talking about. External evidence now, which is stuff that comes from everything around us in the universe. And then later, once we get an exhaustive amount of those, we're going to move to the evidence that I find inside the Bible itself. I call it internal evidence. All right? And that is part of internal evidence right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
I won't be late the next one. Anyway, it's 2 weeks. I did. I got to watch the video too.
And watch that first one specifically. The second one will be up online, but I really want you to watch the very short.
Yeah, I sent them the first one. So.
Yeah, these guys, you didn't send it.
Yeah, I'm gonna send it to Max.
Gotcha.
Oh my God, I should set up the gauge.
Anything else? Good class, good questions. We're gonna go next week into intentional design. Talk a little bit about that. I don't know if that's gonna take 1 week or 2 weeks, but it's powerful and it's important and it's something that's just popped up in you guys' lifetime. Okay? All right.
Thanks, Chad.
That David sent the video to like my family group